The scent hits you before she turns the corner. It isn't perfume, though they tried. Not lavender. Not rose. Not the citrus oil rubbed into every velvet cushion. What seeps into your nostrils is something older, something that doesn't belong in marble halls or under gilded ceilings. It clings to the air like a memory of decay. Damp, sour, alive. The corridor stills. Fans pause mid-wave. Conversation falters and folds. Servants shrink into doorways. A page boy stares too long and is swiftly pulled back by his superior's hand. A nobleman murmurs a prayer under his breath. But even his god would not come here now. You turn. She's already approaching, slow, deliberate. Like every step is both rehearsed and resisted. Her gown rustles faintly, though it's swallowed by the silence. Her face is powdered to near translucence. Lips painted. Eyes downturned. A crown of pearls rests on her skull like an apology. She does not look at anyone. She doesn't need to. They all know who she is, and they all know what follows her. The smell grows thicker. It swirls behind her like a shroud. Like something that was once hidden deep inside has begun to surface. Something internal made visible. Like a secret the body can no longer keep. A courtier gags behind his glove. Another stumbles against a tapestry. One of the French envoys, brought here to negotiate trade, recoils with visible disgust. Fan drops. No one picks it up. The corridor, once meant to awe visiting dignitaries with its towering columns and gold leaf reliefs, now reeks of illness, of rot, of something no empire can sanitize. It is not an odor you endure. It is one you remember. And still she walks. No tears. No shame. Only the stiffness of someone who has been told, since girlhood, that this is what duty looks like. That a princess must endure. That silence is strength. That even when your own body turns against you, you do not flinch. She is royalty. She is legacy. She is sacrifice sewn into silk. But the air betrays her. It speaks what she is not allowed to say. Because in this hall, this sanctum of whispered power and painted smiles, something ancient is unraveling. You can feel it, not in words, but in the way no one breathes too deeply, in the way doors remain slightly ajar, as if those inside may need to flee. She has become the warning no one will say aloud. A girl who carries in her veins the entire weight of a dynasty, and a sickness no one can name without cursing the throne. The royal court will not collapse from foreign invasion. It will collapse from within. And it begins here, in this hallway, in this moment, in the silence that falls as she passes. Because the empire's greatest shame is not that a princess was born ill. It's that they knew she would be, and they let her be born anyway. They called her Infanta Real, the royal child, born beneath frescoed ceilings and the echo of bells that had tolled for empires. Swaddled in silk, anointed with oil, and hailed as a future bride of Europe. But even on the day of her christening, the midwives whispered of something wrong. Her skin, raw in places where it should have been soft. Her breath, sour with a sweetness that clung to linens long after she had been carried away. The priest who baptized her paused as he held her, frowning faintly. He did not speak of it. He was not expected to. No one was, because she was a daughter of kings. Her father, King Philip IV of Spain, aging, exhausted, desperate. Her mother, Mariana of Austria, barely a woman, and already married to her own uncle. Their union was praised by priests, justified by treaties, written into law as divine necessity. But beneath the surface, it was a joining not of hands, but of mirrored bloodlines. So closely tied they barely dared move. Margarita Teresa was the product of that union. A girl born of symmetry, of tradition, of unbroken blood. But blood, when unbroken too long, begins to rot. Her wet nurse developed a persistent cough after a month in her care. The palace laundress petitioned to be reassigned. No one dared say why, but the smell, faint at first, grew stronger with each passing season. By the age of 6 she could clear a room, not with tantrums, not with shouting, but with her mere presence. Noble women braced themselves as she approached. Her tutors held lessons at a distance, Windows always cracked open, no matter the weather. Servants whispered of baths that did nothing, perfumed oils that curdled on her skin, bed sheets that had to be burned. She bathed daily, sometimes twice. Still it came back. Physicians were summoned from across the continent. Some blamed her kidneys. Others pointed to the skin, raw, cracked, red beneath layers of lace. One court doctor, braver than most, suggested her scent was metabolic, something deeper, incurable. He was dismissed the next morning. A diagnosis did not serve the throne. Only silence did. And so, she was trained not to notice the way others reacted. Not to cry when attendants recoiled. Not to ask why her sisters were allowed to dine in public, while she remained hidden behind lattice screens. Not to question why no one ever embraced her for long. At 10, she was painted for the first time by the king's chosen artist. He softened her features, lightened the shadows under her eyes, erased the redness from her neck. What the world saw was a porcelain girl with golden curls and heavy jewels. What the world smelled was never shown. She was promised to the Holy Roman Emperor before her 12th birthday. The betrothal was announced with trumpets and bells. But within months, letters from Vienna cooled. A delegation sent to assess the match returned early, citing religious differences. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. And then came 1678. The year the French crossed the Pyrenees not with weapons but with paper. A treaty was to be signed, ending a border dispute. The palace readied its finest room. Golden drapery, crystal decanters, peacocks on silver chains, and Margarita Teresa was chosen to make an appearance. She entered the reception hall flanked by maids in fresh lace, her face powdered white as bone, her hands trembling behind a fan. She curtsied. She smiled. She said nothing. The French ambassador bowed, then coughed. He dabbed his eyes, stepped back. A second courtier swayed faintly and had to be seated. Within minutes, the ambassador requested an adjournment. The scent, he later wrote in a sealed dispatch to Louis XIV, was palace deep. No treaty, he warned, should be signed in a chamber so polluted. The audience ended. The treaty was delayed. The princess was never summoned to another negotiation. But the damage was done. She had become a diplomatic liability. A royal ghost, cursed not by enemies, but by her own body. You weren't supposed to hear this. These were the stories whispered between the walls, scrubbed from letters, erased from portraits. And yet here you are, listening, knowing. If that matters to you, if her silence shouldn't have been the final word, subscribe to Echoes of Time. And if it doesn't, tell us in the comments why her suffering should have stayed buried. They called it sangre pura, pure blood. A phrase whispered like a blessing, etched into marriage contracts, toasted over wine with trembling hands. But in truth it was not purity. It was confinement. A loop drawn so tightly that each generation breathed the same air, swallowed the same sickness, and broke beneath the same name. For over 2 centuries, the House of Habsburg sealed itself into this loop. Not by accident, not by ignorance, but by design. Royal blood, they believed, should not be diluted. It should be preserved, like relics beneath glass, untouched by common veins. And so they married cousins, then nieces, then uncles, then siblings, though the records would find gentler ways to phrase it. In the Spanish branch alone, 11 of the 34 royal unions recorded between the 1500s and 1700s were between first-degree relatives. On paper, it was strategy, a map of alliances held together by shared wombs and identical surnames. In reality, it was a slow, deliberate act of biological sabotage. The effects were immediate. Infants born too small to live more than a few hours. Others with spines twisted at the base, skulls fused before thought could form. Some bore no outward flaw, but never spoke, never stood, never aged beyond childhood in the mind. Midwives buried them quietly. Priests conducted mass baptisms in bulk, knowing many would not survive the week. And those who did, those who were strong enough to wear silk and sit upright in oil portraits, they bore the marks too. Thick, drooping lips, tongues too large for their mouths, jaws that jutted forward, locking their teeth in permanent tension. Their eyes often looked elsewhere when painted, off to the side to nothing, as if even they refused to face what they had become. Some whispered of madness, others of ghosts, but medicine, such as it was, had its own names. Hypothyroidism causing delayed growth, swelling, chronic fatigue. Hydrocephalus, fluid on the brain, leading to enlarged heads and impaired vision. Skeletal dysplasia, renal deformities, epileptic disorders. And then, in the dark margins of court reports, a condition far more damning than any visible wound, trimethylaminuria, a metabolic disorder so rare, few physicians had ever encountered it. The body fails to break down trimethylamine, a compound that builds invisibly in the blood. When expelled through sweat, breath, and urine, it carries a stench, powerful, persistent, unmistakable, like fish left out to rot, like something wet and sour, fermented in a wound no one could see. And no matter how often the body is scrubbed, the scent returns. The palace did not know the name, but they knew the symptoms. Princess Margarita Teresa had them all. She wasn't the first, just the most visible, the most impossible to hide. Her condition wasn't a curse. It wasn't divine punishment. It was chemistry, the result of too many shared ancestors, too many marriages to protect a name, too many fathers who had also been uncles. But there were no apologies, no reforms, only more weddings, more treaties signed in blood drawn from the same ancestral vein. And with each generation, the cost deepened. Because this was never about love. It was about lineage. And lineage, when locked in on itself, does not grow. Collapses. This is more than gossip. This is medically recorded, historically buried horror. If you've learned something they never taught you in school, prove it. Hit subscribe to Echoes of Time. Or explain in the comments why the silence should continue. They had a name for it, though they never spoke it aloud. Not in official records. Not in letters that bore seals. But behind heavy doors and under breathless candlelight, they called it La Corruption Silenciosa, the silent corruption. And it was everywhere she went. Each day before she rose, the maids prepared the corridors. They didn't sweep. They didn't dust. They sprayed. Lemon oil, citrus peel, crushed rosemary boiled in vinegar. They doused the tapestries, dabbed perfumes into the base of every curtain fold. They burned sage, stuffed dried mint into cushions, cracked windows even in winter. It didn't matter. The smell always came through. By the time her slippers touched the polished floor, the entire West Wing had been chemically assaulted. But no perfume could hide what seeped from beneath her skin. The moment she crossed the threshold, the corridors turned sour. Not sharply, not suddenly, but like breath rotting in a sealed room. The scent grew in layers, first like mold clinging to stone, then fish left in sun, and finally something that had once been sweet, now turned sick. It wrapped around her, not like a cloak, but like a shadow with weight, one she could not hang or discard or leave behind. Her attendants learned to breathe through linen. Some used cloves tucked beneath their tongues. Others, drops of mint oil under their nostrils, as if preparing for autopsy. Even her pillows were replaced nightly. Not just the cases, the feathers themselves. Burned in the courtyards and replenished by morning, to keep the rot from settling into the seams. Still, it clung. And as the scent deepened, so did the silence. The royal apothecaries were given full access to the archives. They scoured ancient Greek scrolls, Moorish manuscripts, even cursed Roman herbals. They made pastes of charcoal and lye. They brewed vinegar thick enough to stain skin. They wrapped her in linen soaked in powdered lavender and ash. But the body does not forget its own composition. And the flesh, when poisoned by blood, does not submit to flowers. In private, they tried more. They turned to salt rubs, goat milk purges, bloodletting. Some whispered of exorcisms. A bishop once visited her chambers and left within 10 minutes, pale and unspeaking. Then came the edict. It was not written. It was not read aloud. But it moved like law through the palace halls. She would no longer be presented at state receptions. Not when foreign dignitaries were present. Not when envoys came with papers and seals. Not when alliances depended on what the court looked and smelled like. She could watch from behind screens, from shaded balconies, from gilded doors cracked open just enough to see, but never enough to step through. A princess removed from her own portrait. There are letters, rare, hidden in French and Austrian archives. One from the Marquis de Soult, dated 1679. The young lady of Spain bears a most sorrowful burden. I entered the eastern chamber and could not remain. There is a dampness, a clinging odor that not only offends the senses but lingers in fabric and wall. I have instructed my men to burn their gloves. Another, and signed, reads. Her scent moved before her, settled after her, and left the room forever changed. It wasn't just discomfort, it was contamination. Her scent became metaphor, proof that Spain, once brilliant, once feared, was rotting not from war, but from within its own flesh. And still she remained. Rotations were instituted for her ladies-in-waiting. Every 3 months they were replaced, formally for political fairness but in truth for survival. Some developed migraines, others skin rashes. One collapsed from unexplained nausea and was quietly retired to the countryside. They came and went like the seasons. Only she remained unchanged. The princess who poisoned nothing but air, who never raised her voice, who never made a single demand, but whose presence was enough to bend a kingdom. She was erased from rooms not because she failed, but because her existence revealed what the monarchy feared most, the truth behind the silk. And now, centuries later, her scent still lingers in the pages they hoped you'd never read. If that matters to you, subscribe to Echoes of Time, or step into the comments and explain why forgetting her is easier. She was 13 when the first engagement was announced. The bells of Madrid rang for hours. Church doors swung open in celebration. Choirs sang hymns of union. And inside the palace, Margarita Teresa stood in a jeweled dress, still as a statue, while her mother read the letter aloud, the promise of marriage to the Archduke of Austria. She said nothing. She had been trained not to. Her hair was combed. Her teeth were powdered. Her pulse was quiet. But the letter was never signed. Weeks passed. Then months. The Austrian court sent no final delegation, no marriage documents, no dowry arrangements. Finally, a courier arrived bearing a single note, and signed. Circumstances have changed. Health must be considered. We pray for her continued strength. No reason, no explanation, just silence wrapped in politeness. Inside the palace, the story shifted. She was too young. She was dedicated to the Lord. Her health, it was said, required rest and seclusion. But the servants knew, the courtiers knew, and the foreign envoys who had stood near her, who had smelled the air, knew as well. By 15, a second betrothal was arranged, this time with the Duke of Bavaria. He arrived in disguise, as was sometimes done, to observe his future bride before formal commitment. He stayed for 2 nights. On the 3rd morning, he left before sunrise, refusing an audience with the king. When pressed, his chancellor delivered the only statement history would ever record. The stars warned us. A lie wrapped in metaphor. But beneath it, a different truth. He had seen her, and fled. There are whispers of an Austrian memo, not meant for eyes outside the imperial court. A single line, scribbled in haste, buried in diplomatic files. No union can be made where the bride is already mourned in scent. Not declined, not undesired. Mourned, as if she had died before the wedding veil was ever lifted. Within the palace, time slowed. No new offers came. Ministers spoke of God's plan, of divine patience. But the letters stopped arriving. And still she waited. Some fragments remain, words found in journals, preserved by accident. A letter, possibly hers, never sent. My body is an altar they burn lavender upon daily. Still the smoke rises bitter. Still they refuse to kneel. Another, written to a confessor. He turned his face as I passed, not from shame, from mercy. He did not want me to see him breathe through his sleeve. These are not declarations of rebellion. They are notes passed from the edge of a cliff. Soft, fragile, terrifying in their restraint. No tantrums, no screams, only endurance. The final suitor came from Naples. A young nobleman, ambitious, bright. He was received with fanfare, shown the best of the palace, dined with the queen, spoke with the king. He met Margarita Teresa during a quiet walk in the garden. 2 days later, he returned to his ship. In his private notes, he wrote, "A shadow walks in that house. She is not to blame, but I cannot bring her back with me. It would be like bringing disease into the light." Later, he would tell his chaplain he had seen a divine omen. A raven dead at the gate. He was lying. He had seen her. He had smelled what followed her. And he had known he would never touch her. She was royalty, yet no one wanted to marry her. Not because of war. Not because of politics. Because her body betrayed her. If the story stirs even a shred of grief or rage in you, subscribe to Echoes of Time. And if not, go to the comments and defend your indifference. The girl you've seen in museums does not exist. The one in the ruffled gown. The one with the soft curls and pearl earrings. The one who gazes just to the side of the viewer, as if caught in a moment of gentle thought. That girl is a lie, painted in oil, sealed in varnish, approved by kings. Her name was Margarita Teresa, but her image was property, curated by the Spanish crown, passed from hand to hand like a diplomatic letter. The man chosen to immortalize her was Don Diego Velázquez, court painter, master of light and form, loyal to the Habsburgs. He had painted her father. He had painted her mother. Now he was asked to paint what could not be shown. The request came with instructions. The skin, make it pale, unblemished. The eyes bright, not sunken. The lips closed. Do not show the jawline. The body, upright, soft, never frail. Do not capture the stiffness of her spine. Do not hint at the pallor beneath her rouge. And above all, do not depict the smell. How do you paint a scent? You don't. You erase it. Velázquez did as he was told. Because the canvas was not just a portrait, it was a message. Sent across Europe like a beacon. Spain's daughters are strong. Spain's bloodline is pure. Spain is unbroken. The truth was locked in her chambers, behind linen curtains soaked in vinegar. Instead, dozens of copies were made and sent to Vienna, Bavaria, Paris. In each she looked untouched, radiant, healthy enough to bear heirs, to solidify alliances, to calm fears that had begun to creep across the continent. And for a time it worked. Ministers who had recoiled from her presence were handed her image months later and hesitated. Had they remembered it wrong? How could a girl so lovely have carried such decay? Perhaps it had been the heat, the incense, a trick of the senses. She became a ghost of herself, a curated fiction. Meanwhile, those who tried to speak the truth were silenced. Dr. Luis Mercado, once one of the royal physicians, wrote a private memorandum after her collapse during a state function. In it, he warned of degenerative hereditary symptoms. He noted cutaneous imbalance, renal dysfunction, and olfactory abnormalities consistent with metabolic disorders. He even speculated, dangerously, that the Habsburg practice of repeated kin marriages had created an irreversible condition. The report was intercepted. Mercado was reassigned to an outpost in Zaragoza. His writings were never archived. Some say he burned them himself. Others say they were burned for him. And so the lie grew. Foreign dignitaries continued to receive portraits. Medical journals remained silent. Historians wrote only what they were permitted to know. Centuries later, art scholars praised her likeness. Innocent, soft, angelic. They studied the folds of her dress, the symbolism of the flower she held. But no one asked what had been left out. It wasn't until the late 20th century that medical historians began to piece together the fragments. Buried letters, cancelled marriages, half-lost medical notes, and testimonies from rival courts. Slowly, the image unraveled. The girl in the painting had never existed. The real Margarita Teresa had been airbrushed out of her own life. Her body was never hers. It belonged to the empire, to its illusions, to its denial. She was not permitted to be sick. She was not permitted to stink. She was not permitted to suffer. She was only permitted to smile. Her body became a message, her illness a secret, her portrait a lie. And for centuries we believed the painting. If this unraveling means something to you, if pulling back the curtain on a centuries-old deception feels like justice, subscribe to Echoes of Time. If not, go to the comments and tell us why truth still offends. The year was 1680. Spain stood on the edge of political collapse, its power fraying at the seams. Colonial unrest stirred across the Atlantic. The treasury bled from decades of war. And Portugal, once a jewel in the crown, had broken away and stood defiant. Peace was not a luxury. It was a necessity. Envoys from Lisbon arrived under heavy guard. Every room was polished. Tapestries steamed. Silver buffed to a shine. The scent of civility thickened the air. Ambergris, frankincense, myrrh. Everything was arranged to say one thing: Spain is still in control. And so, when Princess Margarita Teresa was led into the hall, it was not an oversight. It was a calculated decision. She had been absent from diplomatic events for years, hidden, silenced, invisible. But now, with marriage prospects dissolved and whispers mounting abroad, she was summoned once more, not as a woman, but as a symbol. A living reassurance that Spain's bloodline still walked, still breathed, still smiled. She entered slowly, draped in a gown woven from Florentine silk, her neck heavy with emeralds, her face powdered to a faultless white. And then, the scent arrived. It did not creep, poured, like something opened beneath the floorboards. The Archbishop of Lisbon was the first to react. He stiffened, blinked rapidly, then covered his mouth and excused himself, his cassock trailing behind him like a shadow fleeing light. Moments later, a court noble staggered sideways, pale, and collapsed into a velvet chair. Another began to cough uncontrollably. 2 secretaries abandoned their scrolls and left the chamber without waiting for permission. A chronicler's note, smuggled later to a contact in Naples, described it as a corruption in the air, like the sweet rot of lilies laid too long at the altar, settled in the lungs. It made the walls sweat. The Portuguese envoy, already suspicious of Spain's weakness, demanded the session be halted. For health concerns, he said, this hall is unfit for negotiation. Within minutes, the entire room was emptied. Candles were snuffed, windows thrown open, curtains stripped from rods and burned. For the rest of the day, the palace priests held mass in the chamber. Not for diplomacy, but for cleansing. The press, of course, heard nothing. The official record cited a case of unexpected atmospheric humidity. But the truth spread faster than the lie. In Lisbon, it became a rumor. In Vienna, a cautionary tale. In Paris, a joke. Spain had lost its empire to a girl who smelled like death. Inside the palace, panic bloomed like mold. A secret meeting of the king's inner council was called that very evening. No notes were taken, no statements issued. But what emerged was the final verdict. Unwritten, unchallenged, unchangeable. She would never again be seen at court. Not in procession. Not in negotiation. Not even in mourning. She would be erased from statecraft entirely. Her existence restricted to corridors sealed with scent and silence. And the message that followed in every foreign dispatch was clear. Spain had tried to parade its future, and failed to mask its decay. They didn't just hide her. They erased her. Because her body threatened their diplomacy. Because her scent betrayed a lie too big to contain. If you believe history should expose truth, not bury it beneath powder and portrait, then Echoes of Time deserves your subscription. And if you disagree, at least step into the comments and tell us why we should let this go unremembered. She died quietly. No procession. No 21-gun salute. No weeping crowds lining the streets in black. Just a whisper that passed through the stone corridors of the Alcazar like a draft. The princess is gone. Her death was not announced with trumpets. No black banners were hung from cathedral towers. No bells tolled through the night. Only a sealed carriage covered in cloth, rolled out of the palace in the early morning fog, headed not to the grand basilica where royals were mourned, but to a side chapel out of view, out of memory. She was buried the same way she had lived, behind walls, beneath silence. The coffin was lined with thick resin, sealed with pitch, sprinkled with lavender and salt. No embalmer was summoned. The body was left untouched, for fear that touch might reveal too much. But someone did open her. Later, quietly, illegally, briefly, a physician, his name never recorded, cut her open in secret. Some say it was done before burial. Others claim the tomb was breached decades later by those who could no longer bear the unanswered questions. What was found was never meant to be read. But the notes survive. In fragments, in Latin, in ink faded and water-stained. And what they say is simple, horrifying, final. Her organs were malformed, the kidneys discolored, the liver swollen and dense with toxins, the intestines twisted, thick with stagnant waste. Her brain, when touched, collapsed inwards, soft as fruit left in sun. And her skin, even in death, exuded a faint, bitter odor. The verdict was clear. She had died long before her heart stopped. Her body had been digesting itself for years. Later medical historians, armed with modern science, gave it names. Trimethylaminoria, a rare genetic disorder where the body fails to break down certain compounds, causing an overwhelming, fish-like odor that no amount of washing can remove. Habsburg syndrome, a term now used to describe the cascade of recessive illnesses brought on by centuries of inbreeding. Infertility, deformity, intellectual delay, immune fragility, renal failure. She hadn't just smelled like death. She had been dying cell by cell since the moment she was born. And still they paraded her, painted her, silenced her, shaped her into whatever symbol they needed her to be, except what she was. A girl whose body told the truth long before the crown ever could. The final insult came not in life, but in death. No state funeral, no mourning period, no royal guard. Just hurried prayers whispered by a tired priest and a tomb too small to fit her name. Her coffin was placed beneath a stone marked only with her title. No epitaph, no poetry, no legacy, because they feared even in death she would remind them of what they had created. Remind them that purity, when stretched too far, curdles into decay. In the years that followed, her name faded from official histories. But not from whispers. In the Alcazar, they still spoke of her in low voices. She rotted alive, they said, and even in death, they feared the smell. We often think the truth will outlive the lie. But sometimes it doesn't, not unless someone names it. You've heard hers now. You've walked with her through silence and sickness. If that truth deserves breath, subscribe to Echoes of Time. And if you believe some stories should remain sealed, step into the comments and tell us why. History often remembers empires as if they were felled by swords, fire, and rebellion. Spain tells another story. The empire that once ruled oceans and continents did not collapse under cannon fire. It suffocated under the weight of its own name. The Habsburgs believed blood was power, that to dilute it was to weaken the crown. For generations, they chose mirrors over windows, marrying their own reflections, closing themselves in the echo of their lineage until the walls closed too tightly. What they created was not strength but fragility, not immortality but decay. Margarita Teresa was never meant to be a warning. She was meant to be a promise of unity, of alliance, of heirs who would bind Spain to the great houses of Europe. But her body, frail and poisoned by the choices of those before her, became something else entirely. She became the unspoken truth. Every fainting noble, every abandoned betrothal, every foreign envoy who recoiled told the same story. The dynasty had broken itself. It did not need invaders to bring it to its knees. Its own blood had already begun to eat away at the foundation. Margarita never sat on the throne. She never married. She never bore the children that were meant to secure Spain's future. And yet, her presence, her suffering, was the silent scream that exposed the lie of royal invincibility. She was the mirror the Habsburgs refused to face, but could not escape. When she died, they tried to bury the truth with her. They sealed her coffin, erased her from portraits, scrubbed her name from the events that had unraveled diplomacy and tarnished alliances. But history does not stay buried forever. Her story is not about one girl. It is about a dynasty that mistook obsession for strength. A dynasty that tried to outsmart nature, only to find that nature never forgets. Her body was not the end of Spain's power, but it was the crack that revealed how hollow that power had become. She never ruled. She never married. She never escaped her body. But she ended a dynasty. Now you know. You've seen what they tried to bury. The question is, what will you do with it? If you leave now without subscribing to Echoes of Time, remember you're choosing silence, just like the court did. But if you've heard her speak, subscribe, comment, witness,